to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today, and Happy New Year. It's January 4th, 2016, our first show of the year. Boy, we have got so much to talk about today. I take 4 days off, and the world just goes to heck. I don't know what's wrong with these people. They couldn't keep things calm. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Shane is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, obviously, a lot of attention is being given to the developing situation up in Oregon over the persecution of the two of the men from the Hammond Ranch, and there's a bit of a standoff going on up there. Now, the Hammonds themselves have surrendered to law enforcement to begin their 5-year prison sentences. They don't want any violence, but there's another group that's up there. They have invaded and taken over an abandoned wildlife management station. You know, the federal government's acting like this is an attack on the White House. This was an abandoned facility that these guys have moved into. And obviously, I'm very concerned that this situation not escalate, that it not be exploited by the government to outlaw militias and further justify Obama's grab of military-style weapons. And certainly the corporate media is attempting to portray all these people as terrorists and thugs and white supremacists. And that's because they don't really want to look at the issues going on behind all of this, which is a continuation of this policy that we've seen over the last decade of the U.S. government, through its Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, grabbing more and more privately owned land for its own possession, even though this is a violation of the Enclave Clause of the Constitution. So the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association of America have released a statement saying that they want things to be peaceful. Nobody's talking about any kind of violence, other than the FBI, which is on its way up there now with a bunch of armed thugs trying to provoke the situation. And already the spin is that the people in Oregon, they want a new Ruby Ridge. They want a new Waco to make the U.S. government look bad. The U.S. government doesn't need any help to look bad. They're doing an excellent job all by themselves. So, what's really going on? What is this all about? Okay, well, as usual, it's about a land grab. Now, up there in Oregon, the Bureau of Land Management for years, for decades, has been trying to grab all the privately owned land in the area to add to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Now, remember, federal ownership of the public lands is prohibited by the Enclave Clause of the Constitution. What most people do not know is that all of these wilderness refuges, wilderness zones, wildlife refuges, wetlands, heritage rivers are available to be pledged as collateral for U.S. government borrowing. Because after Nixon ended gold convertibility, and it became generally known that the U.S. doesn't have enough physical gold to collateralize all of its borrowing, Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency to basically start grabbing public lands, taking ownership of them in violation of the Enclave Clause in order to use them as collateral for future government borrowing. And by the way, this is exactly the reason the Founding Fathers put the Enclave Clause in the Constitution, to prohibit the federal government from looting the public lands to get themselves out of self-created economic disasters. But as the government borrows more money, they have to grab more land to use as collateral. And that's why we're seeing an escalation. They're not backing off one tiny bit. Now, to get the ranchers in the area to sell to the Bureau of Land Management, there have been a variety of underhanded tactics used. Back in the 1970s, the Fish and Wildlife Service declared grazing detrimental to wildlife and started slashing grazing rights. This drove many of the ranchers into bankruptcy and forced them to sell their properties to the government for pennies on the dollar. In the 1980s, staff at the Wildlife Refuge deliberately changed the flow of water to overflow Malheur Lake, which drowned out the ranches on its shores. destroying the ranches and forcing the owners to sell their property to the Bureau of Land Management for pennies on the dollar. The Hammonds are the last holdout, and the government covets their property because along with being a large chunk of land to be added to the refuge, it also has natural gas and uranium deposits, which make it ideal for collateralization. So that's what's going on. Now, back in 2006, lightning started wildfires across the countryside. The Hammonds started a backfire, which is a well-known and prescribed technique to prevent a fire from spreading, and it worked, halting the fires that were started by the lightnings. Now, despite this, the Bureau of Land Management arrested the Hammonds because the backfire they started charged some of the federal land. Nobody's going to arrest Mother Nature for the much greater fire damage caused by the lightning, but they've got the Hammonds, and they charged them with deliberate arson, treating them as if they had deliberately intended to harm the federal-owned land inside the refuge. Then they added the terror charge, and nobody will explain how or why such a charge is justified. That's the one that carries the 5-year penalty. Now, this is clearly an accident. To charge them with deliberate arson, that was absurd. To charge them with terror is absolutely ridiculous. But by forcing these two men to serve a 5-year jail sentence, they won't be there to run their ranch. The ranch is going to go out of business, and there will be the Bureau of Land Management ready to buy up the ruins for pennies on the dollar. That's what's going on. Now, the corporate media is out there saying, oh, this is sparking anti-government sentiment. Look, you look at the recent polls. There's plenty of anti-government sentiment. You're not going to blame it on the Hammonds or the Bundys. If you want somebody to blame a government that has gone off its constitutional reservation. And the corporate media, even the Huffington Post, are out there trying to say, these people are terrorists. They're all terrorists. They're terrorizing, that empty building they took over. But it's all about grabbing land. It's all about taking it over. Harry Reid was doing the same thing down in Nevada. Was caught red-handed, using the Bureau of Land Management to take over 60 parcels of land, which once the government had them, turned around and were sold to various foreign interests. And Harry Reid made a fortune off of this. Using the government to take land away from its rightful owners, and making it available for sale, and Harry got his little piece of the action. That's what's going on out there. And probably because of the awareness of this, the Gallup poll released this morning, surveying Americans about their attitudes for the last year. And Americans named the government as the top problem facing us all in 2015. Worse than the economic problems, worse than unemployment, worse than immigration, worse than ISIS. Americans see the government as the problem, and they're absolutely right. Now, I don't want there to be any violence up there in Oregon, but I'm not going to get on the bandwagon of saying these guys are terrorists and thugs because they're trying to take a stand for principles, for the Constitution. And we're already hearing the government shills, they're loading up on all the things. Saying, well, the Constitution, it's really just kind of an outline and a framework, and you really shouldn't take it literally. Yeah, actually we do. Because that's the way it was written. That Constitution is the original contract with America. It is the rules under which we, the people, allow the government to act as custodian of our nation's sovereignty. And anybody who doesn't want to play by those rules, the honorable thing to do is to resign and seek gainful employment. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, the other big news event that's going on is over this weekend, Saudi Arabia carried out a mass execution of 47 people by beheading, and it has caused a tremendous amount of upset all across the Middle East because among the 47 were protesters and a Shia cleric, Sheikh al-Nimr. And a lot of people are saying this was completely inappropriate. There's been a huge backlash. The Saudi embassy in Tehran was overrun and burned. And it's a huge upset. Now, according to a story coming out of the Independent in Great Britain, a leaked memo shows that Saudi Arabia was expecting a backlash from this mass execution. Maybe they were going to try and use it to provoke a confrontation. Because already we're seeing Iran and Saudi Arabia, they've broken off diplomatic relations, they're closing each other's embassies, they're kicking out their ambassadors. This could be the back door to the war with Iran that the U.S. and Israel have been wanting for years. Because if Iran and Saudi Arabia go to war, guess whose side the United States will insist your children have to fight on? Now, Saudi Arabia is in trouble, not just economic. Their own people are fed up with the royal ruling family. We're seeing these articles like in Business Insider. Saudi Arabia is in serious trouble, and they know it. Apparently, we're seeing a report that just came out just a few minutes ago over in Far News where Saudi protesters are calling for the overthrow of the al-Saud regime. So, all right, we're going to grab ourselves a real quick phone call. Andrew in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, I want to talk about the incident in Oregon.
Yes.
And I guess I got spawned the New World Order agenda where you don't own the land, the government owns the land and tells you what to do.
Well, basically, the agenda seems to be that individual families are not allowed to own family farms anymore. Only corporations are allowed to own farms to keep you dependent on corporations to keep on eating. It's another attack on our freedom and independence. And again, everything the federal government has been doing all along violates multiple portions of the Constitution. They're not playing by the rules. And as far as I'm concerned, that means that Washington, D.C. is an illegal, illegitimate government.
One thing I'm worried about is, especially Alex Jones is saying that, like, even though the protest is legitimate, he's saying that the government could set up a trial where they could teach a false flag event to demonize, like, gun owners and militia and, like, the Patriot movement.
Oh, he's right about that. He's right about that. I mean, we're already seeing the media trying to portray the Hammonds and the Bundys as domestic terrorists, and that dovetails exactly in with Obama's coming executive order that says anybody on a terrorism watch list is not allowed to own a gun. And I'm going to be tearing that argument apart a little bit later in the show.
And plus, aren't the militias infiltrated by government agents like...
Hello? Are you there?
Yeah, I was going to say, aren't, like, militias sometimes infiltrated by government...
Oh, all the time. All the time. I remember back in the 1990s when the communications director of the Tri-States militia was outed as an FBI informant. Remember the Elohim City, which was supposedly this hotbed of white Christian separatism that Timothy McVeigh planned the Oklahoma City bombing in, and then it turned out the guy who founded and ran Elohim City, Robert Miller, was an FBI informant. They set these things up to try and lure people in to keep an eye on them or set them up as patsies. Of course the militias are infiltrated. Of course there are people in there who are going to cause damage to try and demonize patriots. They're trying to create an idea of the poor victim government, at the mercy of these armed, violent extremists. And they're not armed, violent extremists. They are American citizens who are trying to hold the government to the contract, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And we know that's the real issue. And again, as I said before, we've got all these obvious government shills all over the web posting, that the Constitution really, it's just an outline. It's a rough guide. It's not really explicit and binding. Yeah, it is, actually. And we're not going to let you go there to say that the government may change the Constitution at its whim. It may not. There's a proper method for altering the Constitution. It's called a constitutional amendment, requiring passage by both houses of Congress, signature by the President, and ratification by 3/4 of the states. And no, you may not declare an amendment ratified if it hasn't actually happened. Little final reminder there.
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks. We're going to switch over here to Keith in Montana. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Why, hello, Michael. Didn't you get my photos of the Ukraine today?
I don't think I did.
There's 3 or 4 of them there. It shows the Ukraine so-called soldiers now sporting the emblem of ISIS.
Oh, really? Now, that's kind of funny because Poroshenko was saying that it was the other side. ISIS was on the side of the Donetsk People's Republic, I thought.
Yeah, sure they are.
No,
anyway, there's 3 or 4 of them there.
Okay, I didn't see those pictures, so you may have to resend them.
All right, I will too, okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot.
All right, best to you and Claire. Bye.
Happy New Year. Okay, getting on back to Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm not the only person suspecting that Saudi Arabia carried out this mass execution, hugely brutal exercise, including protesters and a cleric, to try and destabilize the Middle East. We're seeing the same opinion coming out of Press TV. Bahrain has joined Saudi Arabia in cutting ties with Iran. Remember, war with Iran appears to be the goal here. Sudan has expelled the Iranian ambassador. United Arab Emirates downgrades links with Iran. Iran's the target, even though the P5+1 was negotiated and Iran is abiding by its rules. They still want their war. Remember, General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this all the way back in 2003. Iran is the final target in this war to dollarifize the Middle East and keep the world's resource trade shackled to the dollar, because without that, the U.S. has got nothing to hold up its economy. We don't have any manufacturing. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. Without that mafia-like piece of the action of all global commerce, by forcing everybody to use the U.S. dollar, the U.S. economy will implode. That's absolutely where we are right now. Over in Yemen, Saudi troops have come under surprise attack by the Yemeni forces. They're apparently not doing very well over there. In fact, Yemen's forces are now starting to conduct missile strikes deep into Saudi Arabian territory. So Saudi Arabia is now dealing with the reality that acting as a U.S. proxy wasn't quite the slam dunk they thought it was going to be. So, what is the U.S. and everybody else going to do with all these pesky provinces that are breaking away? We'll have a report on that after we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to what I teased going to the commercial break here, I'm seeing all these articles pouring on in. Whatever Saudi Arabia thought they were trying to do, executing those 47 people all at once, it appears to be backflashing. Oman is now criticizing Saudi Arabia for cutting ties with Iran. And we're hearing all these reports that internal discontent in Saudi Arabia is rapidly exploding. They may have hoisted with their own petard. So this is causing all kinds of political chaos across the region. And again, I think Saudi Arabia was acting like a U.S. proxy, the way Saudi Arabia has been acting as a U.S. proxy in Yemen. The U.S. wanted Saudi Arabia to provoke a war with Iran so the U.S. could send your kids into Saudi Arabia to fight against the Iranians and accomplish the war that the U.S. war hawks and Israel have been demanding for years. Now, things aren't going very well over there in Libya because the people of Libya want to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler and take back control of their country. And so now we are hearing from Sputnik News a replay of the successful intervention Obama was talking about only 2 years ago. 4 NATO countries are planning another invasion of Libya. Now, Libya has not attacked a NATO country. NATO has no legitimate reason under international law to be going into Libya. But the United States says we got to go back into Libya and remind those people that when we conquer you, you stay conquered. So the United States, along with Britain, France, and Italy, are going to invade Libya, saying, it's because of Daesh and ISIS and all the rest of it. We're not really making war on the people of Libya, which is, of course, the same dodge they have been using over there in Syria. And already there are 1,000 top British troops on Libyan soil, specifically in the oil fields, to halt the advance of ISIS. It's really all about the oil, isn't it? It's all about the oil. All right, let's grab ourselves some phone calls. Alan in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, I've been listening now for about 5 months, and enjoy your show quite a bit.
Thank you.
Now, I hear, once in a while you talk about some of the other radio shows that do what you do, like Alex Jones and others.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never heard you mention the group Anonymous on your show. Because they kind of, are doing the same thing you're doing as far as, telling everybody about the propaganda on the news and the New World Order and, a lot of the same about the big bankers. And
well, we've linked to a lot of their announcements and videos from our website. I think I've mentioned them on the air a few times. Again, it's hard to get a read on exactly what it is they think they're trying to do out there.
Okay. Well, I just from some of their videos, I kind of mirrors a lot that you talk about and stuff like that. I just thought maybe there was some reason why.
Well, you need to be careful because a lot of a lot of so-called alternative independent media turn out to be just as controlled as the corporate media. And I've always had my doubts about Julian Assange, whose earlier life has a very long criminal record to it. And this guy came out, set up WikiLeaks, and he was front page news on Time and Newsweek, and all the corporate media were calling him the go-to place for people to leak secret information to. And he hadn't done anything at all to get the news coverage. He had registered WikiLeaks only 3 months before, and all of a sudden he was the darling of the media. Meanwhile, you had other websites, including my own, that had already had 10 years of blowing the whistle on government crime, and the corporate media won't pay attention to us. So anytime you see something that's being promoted in the corporate media as the go-to place in the independent media, I honestly think it was a setup to try and trap whistleblowers, because we know this government makes war on whistleblowers. And there were a couple of times WikiLeaks announced they were going to release some really darning information about financial institutions, and then a few weeks later, the hard drive we were storing that on melted and we didn't have a backup. And so I think WikiLeaks may have also been running a little bit of an extortion operation as well. So you got to be very, very careful and just don't look at the personalities, look at the facts, look at what you can actually verify for yourself, because the one thing the U.S. government knows how to do is lie, cheat, and deceive, because that's how they've run this country for the last half century. In fact, they don't know any other way to run the country other than lies, fraud, and deception. And you just have to keep that in mind. Think of the worst dirty trick that you could play on somebody else and assume the federal government will go 3 steps beyond that.
Okay, well, thank you for that view, and Happy New Year, Mike.
Happy New Year. Thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Peter in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I just wanted to call up and first comment on what's going on in Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia goes down, Mike, I don't believe that the world can survive without plunging into World War III. Almost, that's such a destabilizing event that I can't see it any way to avoid it if Saudi Arabia goes.
Well, that depends on how it goes down. I mean, what we're seeing within Saudi Arabia is the ordinary people are very discontented with their ruling royal family, especially because the last couple of kings they've had are all suffering mental illness. And I think what we could see is the Saudi royal family brought down and a true democracy rise in its place. I think that would be a good thing.
Well, I think it would be too, Michael, but I don't believe that's the way it'll go down. It's already chock full of American bases, and all the oil companies, which, of course, have their piece of the presidency and the Congress and all that, they'll intervene in the. If we would intervene in Libya and Syria, then Saudi Arabia it's a given.
Saudi Arabia is a little bit more difficult to intervene in than Syria and Libya. Saudi Arabia has invested much of the money they've made selling oil with American weapons, and they've got far more of them and newer than either Libya or Syria have. And so I think it would be a formidable operation, especially if Saudi Arabia is moving closer to Russia. And you're right, it could unwind into a total world war, and it concerns me that so much of our political leadership thinks a new world war is their best solution to this self-made economic crisis. And they think that because it worked the last 2 times, and, but we, the American people, ought to be very concerned that that's what's going on, to duck the blame for wrecking the economy of the United States of America, the federal government and Wall Street are going to try and get us mired into a new world war.
Mike, I of course haven't heard you for a couple of days now, but have you been following the Wall Street Journal ad on Obama's and the NSA spying on Israel, Netanyahu, and Congress?
Yes, I have. And it's amazing. All the candidates are, how dare you spy on Israel? Really? What about when it was the American people? Who cares?
Right. And of course, they don't say anything about Israel spying on us or Jane Harmon or any of the litany of long litany. But under the Espionage Act and if things, it is, the president is entitled to do it if a foreign country is trying to subvert our political process.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned it because the Wall Street Journal also has another article where they have confirmed that Benjamin Netanyahu approached U.S. members of Congress who were undecided on the Iran deal and offered them financial inducements to vote against it. I mean, it's confirmed. The Wall Street Journal is saying Israel bought members of the U.S. Congress to vote against what was best for the United States.
Can I hang on here?
Yeah, okay,
Mike?
We'll bring you back after the commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back here to Peter in California. You had something else you wanted to add.
Well, Michael, in this article in the Wall Street Journal, which chronicles all this, there's so many disturbing parts about it. It's come out and said that there are major Jewish organizations that they have under direction directly from Israel approaching congressmen and senators. They have the
then they should be registered as foreign lobbyist groups.
Exactly.
There is a law saying if you are there lobbying Congress on behalf of a foreign government, you are a foreign lobbyist and you must be registered, and there are very specific rules regarding what you can do and where you can go.
Mike, they also had Israeli agents, Mossad or whoever, directly approaching American legislators, and then they would not release any of the names of the legislators who were contacted and were asked. They were all asked, by the way, what will it take from us for you to vote for Israel's way? That was a question they were asking. It also doesn't say which of these people who were unnamed said and what their answer was, because this
we can't embarrass these people. They're good for Israel. They must be reelected. Don't you understand how the game works?
And Mike had only passed by 2 votes. It was that close.
Yes.
And then now we have the neocons that are screaming about this, and the only thing about this whole story that they're upset about is that the NSA was spying on Israel, which is their job. Their job is to spy on foreign governments. Yeah,
that's exactly the weird thing, and I'm really annoyed at all of these candidates who are out there trying to ride this for more public visibility, who are screaming, how dare you spy on Benjamin Netanyahu? And yet when it was spying on law-abiding American citizens, they couldn't be bothered. We're all fair game, but Netanyahu he's holy and he's sacrosanct and, you can't spy on him, even though, as you point out, his country spies on us. In fact, remember, just days before 9/11 happened, the FBI had uncovered the largest foreign spy operation ever found in the United States of America, spying on America for Israel. And those dancing Israelis who were arrested as the World Trade Towers came crashing down, they were dancing and high-fiving. Some of those turned out to be Mossad agents. I mean, Israel is the worst spy threat to the United States, but nobody wants to say that. They won't get some of that $6 billion AIPAC has to hand out this election season.
Well, and even in this article, Michael, it goes into how the Israelis had spies within the administration and the negotiating team that were leaking all this Iranian negotiation material illegally to American legislators to help kill the deal.
Yes.
So even in this thing, they're talking about Israel spying on us, but if we spy on Israel, trying to manipulate our foreign policy and our domestic policy and every other goddamn thing, God forbid that. The neocons won't have that.
Well, these are candidates who have already sold their souls to Israel. They were probably on the list of people who said, yes, I will do whatever Israel says if you give me enough money to, and media support to win my campaign. And yeah, everybody out there shouting and screaming about how dare the U.S. spy on Netanyahu. We know they've already sold out to Israel, and they absolutely should not be allowed to attain any elected office anywhere in this country, not even dog catcher. I don't want any Israel firsters even being a dog catcher in this country.
Michael, there's one more insight, or at least a theory that I have about this, and that is that they don't know for sure where this came from, and it's sourced as, multiple 20 plus some sources, throughout the national security and the administration and so on. But of course they don't, and it looks like this is an authorized leak for the story. Now, they haven't released any of these names, like I said, or any of the answers that these legislators gave to when Israel says, what will it take for you to vote against your country and for us? But what this looks to me like is this was an Obama-sanctioned leak that is holding the neocons hostage by saying the next step is to release the people whose names they contacted and what they said.
The problem I have with that, it's entirely possible, but the backlash around the globe to this revelation has been in general that once again it is proven that nobody can trust anything the United States government says about anything, because it was not that long ago when Obama came out and said we've stopped spying on all these foreign leaders, and now, of course, all these foreign leaders are going to go back into their more recent communications and looking for indications of an intercept. And it seems to further damage the international credibility of the U.S. government in order to throw a hammer at the neocons. Obama didn't really need to make the spying public. He could have gone to these neocons and said, this is what we have and what we can document. And if you don't toe the line here, we will then go public, including all the names of those members of Congress who took Israel's money to vote Israel's will. And I think that's important information. I think we should all have that. And it is a stain on the corporate media that they are refusing to share that information with us. It shows that the corporate media is still under the thumb of Israel.
Absolutely it is. And but at any rate, I'm thankful that Obama played hardball with this for once. And,
we have one advantage. This is his last year in office, and he doesn't need Israel. He doesn't need Israel's money, and he's a loose cannon on deck. And while I don't agree with everything Obama is saying and doing, I think we're going to see him strain at the Israeli leash a lot harder this coming year. Now, of course, Israel can come back and say, we'll take it out on the Democratic Party as a whole if you don't do what you're told to do. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see Obama struggle for more independence, because this is the year where he's obsessed with his historical legacy. Okay?
Happy New Year, Mike.
Happy New Year. Thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Welcome back, Michael, on the front lines here. Just wanted to say something, get your opinion. I think when I first heard about this spying thing with Israel and the NSA, whatever, we both know that it was, basically Israel, the Mossad, whoever you want to call them, the Zionists, and the Dick Cheney cabal and the rest of the neocons that did this 9/11 deal. And I think it's like when cops take two thieves and they split them up in different rooms. Boy, the other one sure wants to know what the other one's talking about. And I think by just going over the Internet, a lot of the comments and the shows, people are really waking up to what happened. And I think it's just, Building 7 thing. There is just no way to get around that. That building was wired for demolition. People are waking up to that. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted your opinion, somebody's starting to crack here. The evidence is going to come out, and maybe Israel or the United States, the neocons want to bail. And maybe that's what this whole thing's about. I just wanted your opinion. I'll hang up and get your answer.
All right. Well, basically, you're right. We're seeing a tremendous degree of factionalization taking place within the federal government, within the relations with Israel. Everybody's looking out for themselves here right now, and sooner or later something will crack. You're absolutely right. I got my copy of Incontrovertible, the new documentary about 9/11 and Building 7. And it's rather interesting because, again, the government shills are on overtime all around the net saying, this Dubai building that burned almost to the core, and it's still standing. And everybody's saying, see, Fire doesn't bring down skyscrapers. And the shills are all running around saying, well, you can't use the Dubai building to compare with building number 7 at the World Trade Center because the Dubai building didn't get hit with a jet airliner. Well, guys, neither did building 7. And so, yeah, people are really waking up, and they're breaking free of their cognitive dissonance, and they're beginning to realize they've got to start dealing with the reality rather than what they would like to believe that's being told to them by the government and the corporate media. Because they're starting to understand the continuance of things as they are is leading to disaster for the 99%, for the nation as a whole, a new world war. And everybody is starting to wake up. I'm hearing it around me just as I go about my business here in Hawaii. People are just angry. And they're not activists and they're not protesters. They're ordinary people. The mail carrier, the person at the supermarket. Everybody's getting angry. We'll be right back after news and top of the hour commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300, pardon me, 7645. And we're going to go ahead and grab a couple of phone calls here. We're going to go with Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike, and thank you for having me. I have a new idea. And I looked at the Bill of Rights, and it's written on paper with ink. So I thought of the dollar. What do you think about when we going to write the Bill of Rights, not write, but rather carve it into gold, in a gold plaqué, so that it's very, you can set it in the museum, and around the Bill of Rights there's a line of silver. What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's a good way to display the Bill of Rights, but the Bill of Rights is not an item of value or of debt. It is, again, it's the list of rules, part of the list of rules under which we, the people, allow the government to act as caretaker of our nation's sovereignty. Now, I've seen some very beautiful displays of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Pardon me. When I still lived in Southern California, I had the main page, the first page of the Constitution, as a brass plaque hanging in my living room. And unfortunately, it's one of the things I had to let go when I moved. But again, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are ideas and concepts and rules. And they are not flexible. They are not guidelines. They are absolutely the rules that the government is supposed to follow. The Constitution doesn't tell the government what it can do. It's mostly about telling the government what it cannot do in order to protect the rights and freedoms of the American people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's just an illusion, you know, and a thing I thought about. I think, why not gold? You know, gold is going up and silver is going up. Silver is now at $13 an ounce, $14 an ounce.
Well, I'm sure that by tomorrow the Federal Reserve will have cranked out a whole bunch of new ink and paper stuff to get that stock market back up and crush the gold and silver prices. Because when people start to panic and close their savings account and go into metals and close their stockbroker's account, go into metals, it's all going to come apart very, very quickly. And they're trying to figure out some way they can justify again, taking away physical investment metals from the American people, because they did it before in 1933 to protect the banks, and they're going to do it again. And if they ban cash, they're going to have to ban silver and gold and other precious metals private ownership at the same time, or people will just take those plastic digital cards down to the local coin dealer and say, whatever's in that savings account, give it to me the equivalent in silver and gold coins.
Mm-hmm. You're exactly right, and the last thing I want to say, it's just a metaphor. I just want to say to people that the Bill of Rights is very important for everybody, because that's the thing you have also in law and in court and everything, that are your real rights. And if they fall away, you've got nothing anymore, you know. Well, that's why I'm making the metaphor, you know, with gold and silver. So,
well, the idea of a right is simply when the government steps into power, it is agreeing ahead of time. We understand these are the rights of the people, and we may not trespass upon them. Okay? They're not privileges given by the government. They're not gifts. Common Core is actually teaching now that the Bill of Rights are privileges awarded by the government and to be rescinded at the government's whim. No, that's not what it was all about. The Bill of Rights is all about these are things the government cannot do. And our government, of course, has gone completely off the constitutional reservation. They're trying to convince the American people that, you know, we have to abandon the Constitution and the Bill of Rights or we, the government, will not be able to take care of you. Not that they've done a really bang-up job about it so far. The goal is to get us all dependent on the government so we don't have any more choice at all, because dependency is slavery.
It's true. And never forget, the government are we, the people. So thank you for having me, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too, as well.
Okay.
And thank you
very much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. We're going to let you go and go to James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. A couple points. One is, in a recent show you mentioned about how the alt media needs to work together. And my thought was not just the alt media, but what you call independent or alt medicine, alt agriculture, every faction that has a axe to grind as far as their issue being, you know.
Well, I think when you get out to independent health, there's not a lot of dissent out there, and they tend to work together pretty good as a loose coalition over the net. Most of what you're seeing on any one blog about natural health and avoiding toxins, it's pretty much the same stuff on other, and there's a lot of cross-pollination. Right. The reason the political independent media are often at odds is because some of them have already been compromised.
Well, I mean, what I meant was not that independent health was at odds with each other or any of these factions are at odds with each other, but at odds, anybody that's at any group that's at odds with the government needs to work together, but in a way that's so they're not intimately connected, so things like agent provocateurism cannot take the whole house down. You might think of the way Michael Crichton described how the Japanese business formula in the 80s for success. All these companies worked together like an armada of ships, but they weren't intimately connected business-wise.
Well, it's like the concept of a leaderless resistance, where, you know, you have thousands of independent media websites and thousands of activists all working toward an acknowledged, commonly shared goal, but there are no leaders and figureheads that can be targeted, attacked, and compromised. I know there are some individuals trying to be the figureheads of the truth movement, but we're not going along with that because we realize how, once we all say, oh, I will follow this person and believe what they say, that sets them up to be a target to be compromised.
And the second point I had was perhaps the most important message right now that the independent media and other factions that are aligned with us can promote is an outreach to our overlords, middle management, as in, will they still need you? Will they still feed you in 2024? And the answer is probably not. If they institute this globalist government and all these laws like TVP, then no, the alphabet agency agents and their families, they're not going to have the same kind of lifestyle. It's going to be like Soviet Russia. So
very, very much so. I mean, that's what communism always does. Communism survived by intentionally designing out the middle class, because it is from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy has arisen throughout all of history. And that was how the Soviet Union lasted as long as it did. It simply did not allow there to be a middle class. There was the workers, and then there were the elites, and there was this big empty space between them, and we're starting to see that form here in the United States of America. But the real problem you need to understand is when you don't have a society that produces products to sustain its economy, the economy starts crumbling from the bottom up, and the cracks are now reaching into not just the middle class, but even the upper middle class is starting to feel it. And you cannot hold up an economy by its top any more than you can pick up a building by its roof. It's going to shatter. And that's exactly where our economy is right now.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I have for you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Coming up here on a commercial break, when we come on back, some news from Ukraine. the other war zones, the economy, the campaigns, the candidates. We've got a lot of stuff to cover before the end of our show today, so we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And as you heard on the top of the hour news break, Bill Clinton is there with his wife Hillary in Nashua, New Hampshire, talking about all the great things that she did. And we are actually hearing from people who are at Nashua Community College, where this campaign rally is taking place, and they're reporting that the audience reaction to Bill Clinton consists mostly of frowns, grimaces, eye rolls, for complete boredom. Not working out very well getting Bill. And again, putting Bill Clinton on the campaign trail makes all of Bill Clinton's sexual dalliances and Hillary's covering it up, fair game. It's no longer ancient history, it's current events. Now then, getting on back to Turkey and Syria. Interesting little article over in Global Research up in Canada. When this story first broke about how ISIS in Syria was stealing Syrian oil and trucking it across the border to Turkey, Erdogan's son was reselling it at very low prices, dragging the oil price down, sending out tankers that he bought early last year through a port that Goldman Sachs now owns 1/3 of. And I said, follow the financial tangle to see where this scandal really goes. And according to this article in Global Research, it reaches not only Great Britain, which was reported a week ago, but the United States and pretty much all of the NATO countries. They're out there taking advantage of this virtually free oil to stock up. And now, of course, that it's been exposed, they're all trying to cover it all up and say, no, that's absolutely so. ISIS are the bad guys. We would never buy stolen oil from ISIS. Really, that's just a tinfoil hat, wackadoo, kook, wingnut conspiracy theory. And if you believe in conspiracy theories, then you are a potential terrorist. Apparently over at Mariupol in Ukraine, Kiev soldiers are basically looting the place. And everything they can find in the villages, they are plundering. Actually, the correct word is pillaging. Pillage is a polite military word for keeping your army in the field by stealing everything around them from the people who live there. And apparently they're stealing cattle and poultry to feed themselves. And when an army, a modern army, resorts to pillage, it's because their own state-sponsored supply chains have broken down. Now, according to Ukraine's defense minister, there are no current plans for a new U.S. military base in Ukraine, which doesn't mean anything at all, but at least that's what they're saying. Now, up in Germany, they're calling for faster remilitarization. They want to get their weapons back up and running because they can see how many people are pushing for war. But it may not really be necessary because we're seeing this other article that came out of Sputnik News, where the European people are losing patience with NATO, the constant wars, and the mess they've made of everything. It's just been a botch-up after botch-up after botch-up. And according to writer Robert Bridge, as interviewed by Sputnik News, the people of Europe are not supportive of this. And any leader who tries to start a war without the support of his own people is headed for disaster. Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, laid out all the things you must have to assure victory in war. It's right there in the first part. Two of them are, you must have a military that believes in the rightness of the war so that they will fight and, if necessary, die in combat. And two, you must have a civilian population that believes in the moral rightness of the war so that they will bear the losses and suffering war brings. NATO, and for that matter the U.S. government, do not have either one of those right now. Meanwhile, over in Great Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, is reshuffling the cabinet and is trying to sideline all of the pro-war voices in the British government to try and halt Britain's getting sucked into any more of these disasters. All right, we already talked about the Wall Street article on how Netanyahu was bribing Republican congressmen to change their vote on Iran. And the United Nations human rights envoy to the Palestinian territories has been forced to resign because Israel won't let him in there to do his job. And UN is not going to allow the successor in there either. But he felt he had to resign to make the point that Israel is not cooperating with the United Nations Human Rights Council. But then again, they never have. Brazil just canceled their $2 billion contract with an Israeli security firm for the 2016 Olympics. I guess they started looking at how Israeli security companies were in charge of all the airports used on 9/11, the shoe bomber, the crotch bomber. And they started thinking, with a track record like that, maybe we should take our business somewhere else. All right, let's grab a phone call here. Matt in Oregon. Aloha, Matt. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, you can call me Matt or Patriot, whatever.
All right, Patriot, what's going on?
I'm curious as to your thoughts on the protesters, for lack of a better word, in Oregon.
Well, I think protesters is a good word. Patriots is a good word. I mean, like the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, I'm hoping that this matter will be resolved peacefully. The Hammonds have surrendered to the police, okay? But there are a lot of varying agendas up there that are competing with each other, and obviously we don't want to see this go violent, but at the same time, these people do have a legitimate concern that the federal government has been exceeding its constitutional authority in seizing all of this land, first of all, public land and private land, to try and build up this wealth of real estate to be used as collateral for U.S. government borrowing.
And skip it, dear. And the other thing with that is the executive orders that Obama's talking about for next week. They are armed protesters. I mean, is that going to reflect negatively upon armed citizens?
Only if an agent provocateur goes in there and starts pulling a trigger, which is a very real possibility. Because Obama absolutely is afraid of the American people being armed. And, he's looking at the situation where every time they go on out there with another gun grab false flag or a gun grab speech, gun sales go up. In fact, last year set a record in the terms of the number of applications to the existing background check system. And again, we're going to be talking about this a little bit later in the show, okay?
You are going to get to it?
Yes.
All right. Very nice, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. All righty. As we mentioned earlier in the program, that the fire in the high-rise in Dubai just caused huge amounts of damage to that building. It is still standing. And the online shills are already out there saying, well, you can't compare the Dubai Tower with World Trade Center 7 because it wasn't hit by a jetliner, which, of course, neither was World Trade Center 7. And it had nowhere near the fire of the Dubai Tower, and the World Trade Center 7 building was built extra sturdy and secure because it held government offices. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm getting a lot of comments in the chat room and a lot of emails expressing the concern about the timing between this confrontation up in Oregon and President Obama's promised executive order on gun control. That somebody could pull a trigger and all of a sudden Obama can say, see, Americans with guns are dangerous. They hate the government. And we must take the guns away to protect you all. And it is a valid concern. And if anybody who's involved in Oregon is listening to my words right now, please keep calm and keep your eyes out. That smelly kid with the boxes of ammunition, he's probably the informant. Because, yes, they will infiltrate and start things. All these years later, we found out that the Kent State massacre, that was a horrible moment in the protests against the Vietnam War, was triggered by an FBI informant using a starter pistol to convince the National Guard the protesters were firing on them. That's how this government likes to operate. They think dirty tricks are a divine right. All right, let's talk about the economy because that is in serious hurt this morning going into 2016. The FTSE suffered the worst stock market start in the last 16 years. It began with the Asian markets, and FTSE lost something like 38 billion pounds off the index. But we're seeing both in Britain and here in the United States, oh, it's all because of China. It was China's slump. That's what did it. Yeah, it's all China's fault. Really, blame China. Hate China. Well, Isn't it the people who set up this model of economic globalism who are to blame? Because they're the ones who tore down the barriers, the safety systems that would prevent an economic crash in one country from spreading to other countries. And here it is. China's stock market dropped 7%. They suspended trading. And they're all blaming it on the sharp decline in China's manufacturing earnings. But if you think about it, China's manufacturing is down because Americans' ability to buy imported Chinese goods is down. It's another reason why globalism wasn't such a great idea to begin with. Until you restore a mechanism by which the wealth collected at the top recycles back to the bottom so we can go to the stores and buy the stuff, the economy is going to continue to collapse. The problem we're dealing with right now is the trickle-down economics aren't trickling down, and that means consumers can't consume, and the system is locking up. Now, South Korea's export index is down. It fell 13.8% last month from a year ago. That's a significant decline because they're not able to export products because nobody is out there buying. We're seeing the shipping index has hit an all-time record low, meaning the transport of goods in cargo ships and tankers on the ocean is at the lowest it's ever been since they started keeping records. Same thing going on with the rail index here in the United States. Nobody is moving raw materials around. We've been talking about the Baltic Dry Index. All of these are indicators that the economy is shuddering to a halt. The Atlanta Federal Reserve just slashed the fourth quarter GDP forecast to barely 0.7% positive. They dropped it 1.2% in the last 10 days of the month. So all the good news that Yellen was citing as reasons to raise that rate and look good going into the election year turned out to be false. And by the way, they're not looking good going into an election year because the Dow ended in the red for the entire year of 2015, and it's been more than 30 years since that happened in a pre-election year. Because they always like to gin up the economy going into an election to make you think the incumbents are doing a really good job. And, of course, all they're doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul. And after the election is over, you feel that economic pain from what they've been doing. Now, J.P. Morgan has just downgraded all but one of the biggest emerging economies around the world. 21 of the 22 biggest emerging markets tracked by J.P. Morgan saw a downgrade for the coming year. The only exception is the Czech Republic, and they remain flat. Now, this recent discord between Saudi Arabia and Iran looks to maybe move oil prices back up again, which would be good for Saudi Arabia. But there's a very interesting article that came out of Barnhart.biz asking if the U.S. has been protecting Saudi Arabia from the oil decline by sending it money through Citibank. And the numbers seem to indicate that, yeah. But even still, it wasn't enough. Saudi Arabia had to go into debt for the first time in generations. And, of course, another article, this is from EllenBrown.com. A crisis worse than ISIS, the bail-ins begin. The corporate media is out there trying to keep you scared about ISIS, and they're not paying attention to the bail-ins. And what are the bail-ins? Well, basically, when your bank gets into trouble, they are now allowed to help themselves to the money in your account, for which they will give you stock in the bank. Ooh, how goody. You're going to take my cash and give me stock in a bank that is in the process of failing. Such a deal. They're starting to do it in Europe. The legal framework to do it here in the United States already exists. David Cameron is trying to assuage the concerns of the British people by saying that if we don't allow the banks to raid your savings and checkings accounts, we're going to have to raise taxes and give the banks the money that way. I have another idea. How about you let bad banks collapse? It's not like it would be the end of the world for the human population as a whole to see a bank collapse. Let's get these corrupt institutions, let them drop, let them collapse. Make room for banks with better fiscal sense to get started. Would make sense. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Mark in Texas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, question.
Hello?
Do you think that,
oh, there you are.
Hi, I have a question for you. Do you think that states make a stand now and say, try to enforce this ban, we're going to not only not cooperate, but we're going to use our own people to arrest federal agents coming in here to try to enforce it. The other thing I was going to ask you about, what's going on in Oregon. I know that Larry Pinkney, formerly the Black Panthers, called you some time ago. I don't know if he's called you against this,
Yes.
But he knows a lot about COINTELPRO, and I was wondering whether you could have him on as a guest.
I'll try and get him back on here, but we do have a permanent link to our article on COINTELPRO at the top of the WhatReallyHappened.com page, and I got to see a lot of that stuff because I was in college during that whole 60s, 70s era when COINTELPRO was running rampant over the rights of Americans, and they were setting people up for false arrests, and they engaged in all this disruptive activity to deny Americans their constitutionally protected right to freedom to assemble and protest. And
also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Also, the American Indian movement was
yes.
very similar to this. What happened to the American Indian movement, and I know he was close to Russell Means, too, who was a great man.
Yeah, and Russell was a great man. Leonard Peltier was obviously set up, and it wasn't just the anti-war movement that was targeted by COINTELPRO, Native American movement, civil rights movement, early feminists. All of these groups were being targeted for disruption because the U.S. government wants to keep us at each other's throat. They don't want any progress to be made because they can't manage that. And so, yeah, if you haven't read the history of COINTELPRO, you need to read it.
Yeah, that's why I'm very suspicious of what's going on right now with these guys out there in Oregon, because it really doesn't pay to grab that, what do you call it, little federal center they got there?
Yeah, it's an abandoned building.
Doing his weight, it's what, and just at a time when Obama is going to try his massive with his gun people,
yep.
his gun orders. And again, do you think it's a good idea if the states say no, you're not going to do it?
Well, that's a complex issue, and I will answer that question when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Thank you for the call, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And responding to the question that we were asked before the commercial break here, remember that a presidential executive order is legally binding only on the executive branch of the federal government. It has no force of law against the state governments. It has no force of law against you, the American people. The legitimate purpose of an executive order from the White House is to execute the will of the Congress. It really does not allow the president to write new laws from his desk. And the states are not obligated to go along with whatever Obama says, only the federal government agencies. Now, what we're hearing is that the executive order is going to attempt to change the background check process so that if you're on a terror watch list, you can't get a gun, echoing what they just did up in Connecticut. There are some problems with that, which we'll get into, but I want to finish with the economy first. We're looking at an article out of Zero Hedge, looking at the closing balance sheet of the European Central Bank. They are in the red by trillions and trillions of euros. Technically, they're insolvent. Their liabilities greatly outweigh their available assets. And that's why they're starting to enact bail-ins all across Europe, because nothing saves a bank from its own folly better than looting the people. Another article coming out of Zero Hedge, Puerto Rico has become Greece in terms of its economic default. Oh, you must have austerity, starve your people and give us the money. And here in the United States, there are all the states are in trouble fiscally. But 5 are at the top of the list, and sadly, I'm sitting on one of them right now. The states are Illinois, Connecticut, Hawaii, New Jersey, and Kentucky that are dealing with hopelessly unpayable debt. And so on behalf of my fellow citizens of Hawaii, thank you for wrecking our tourism economy, TSA. You really thought that one through all the way. Financial Times is out there saying that the Affordable Care Act hasn't made health care affordable. No, it hasn't, and it was never intended to. It was a giveaway to the health insurance corporations who are now charging 4 to 5 times more for health insurance than they used to, coupled with sky-high deductibles. I was talking with a friend of mine in the neighborhood whose child had to have surgery last August. And it was a 2-hour outpatient procedure, and even with the insurance, she still had to pay $800. Another article coming out of newsforge.com. At this point, health insurance costs have skyrocketed so high, most Americans are preferring to go with the IRS fines because it's less expensive than the health insurance. So they're paying all this money in fines to the IRS, and they don't get anything for that money because they're not getting health insurance. They're not able to get it. The existing Obamacare compliant policies are being canceled, and you're being offered replacement policies that cost 2 to 3 times as much. And back when they talked about the Obamacare Act, I said, this is exactly what's going to happen, because we saw it happen when automobile insurance was made mandatory. The rates went up, the benefits went down, the service declined. Because once it's made mandatory, they figure they got you. They don't need to take care of you any longer, and we're seeing the same thing with health insurance in this country. The United States has the most expensive health care on earth, and it ranks something like 33rd or 34th in terms of quality. Now, getting on to the candidates and the campaigns, interesting little article that came out of the Right Scoop talking about one of the emails that has surfaced because of Judicial Watch prying these out of the State Department. And it confirms the Pentagon was demanding that Hillary Clinton allow them to send forces to Benghazi during the 2012 attack on the consulate. This completely contradicts the testimony from Hillary and Leon Panetta that no forces were available and within reach to provide help during the attack. They lied, they lied, they lied, they lied. And I've noted commercials on TV for noted cinema propagandist Michael Bay. He's got a new film out about Benghazi to try and cement the official story into the public consciousness. It's a mid-January release, which means even the studios don't think anybody's going to want to see it, and I certainly have no intention of doing so. Now then, Bill Clinton is out there trying to support his wife, and is proving a huge embarrassment because of Hillary Clinton's previous statements that all victims of sexual abuse deserve to be heard and believed, except, of course, for the trailer trash that accused her husband all those years ago. But Bill's presence had made that a current issue for the campaign. And we have all of these victims, some of which Bill Clinton has admitted, yeah, some tacky things happened. Grayson, Perdue, Flowers, Jones, Willie Lewinsky. Some of it was consensual sex, but, Bill was cheating on Hillary. Some of it was groping, but in the case of Juanita Broderick, it was out-and-out rape. And that story is surfacing again. And that's going to haunt Hillary throughout this entire campaign. She has made a huge mistake dragging Bill out on the campaign trail. Especially because there's another scandal brewing, because now it's come out that while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, Bill Clinton made $8 million in speaking fees, speaking to companies that had interests before the State Department. Can you say conflict of interest? So, now the Clinton campaign, I guess they're getting desperate. They've come up with a new idea on how to get a lot of free press. They're having a contest, a drawing. You can sign up for a chance to win a free dinner with Hillary Clinton, as long as you pass the background check and understand up front that the Clinton campaign is not responsible if you should, die getting to the dinner or after eating the dinner itself. I'm not planning on entering the contest, needless to say. Let's see. Let's grab another call here. Tim in Wyoming. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Tim, are you there?
Yep. Hello.
Hello. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Yes. Hi. Thanks for taking my call. Happy New Year. And also, I wanted to say that I think that the people in Oregon, not only are they painting a target on the back of their head, but they're essentially pushing an agenda that the government really wants pushed, as you've been saying for a little while. I understand what they're doing. They're trying to say they're standing up for the right.
I think you're misunderstanding what's going on. I mean, everybody, the Bundys, the Hammonds, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers of America, Sheriff Mack were up there, and their message is clear. We are simply supporting our rights under the Constitution, which is to not have the government come on in and steal land from us or, maneuver things that they can take the land. It's a violation of the Enclave Clause. Nobody is out there advocating for violence. Okay, if violence starts, it's going to be on the part of the government.
Right. I wasn't saying that violence is what they're looking for and what they're trying to promote, but I think that the people, honestly, I mean, they're not only coming out of the shadows to show who they are, so there are a lot of oath keepers. Okay, we know that there are a lot of oath keepers who will not promote the view of the oath keepers. They will say we're oath keepers undercover, essentially, and they will say we won't come out unless it's necessary. Now, what I'm saying about these people in Oregon, and this is the reason I say this, is I think that what they're doing is they're in danger. Now, I heard this from an inside source that was actually on another show. He said that the possibility of a drone strike, and I'm not saying this as a joke. He said that the drones are flying overhead right now in that area, unseen and unheard.
Well, then how does he know they're there?
Well,
I mean, I can imagine that, yes, the government is going to have drones over the area to evaluate the situation, and they may even fly them down lower where they can be seen as a form of intimidation. Okay, but in the court of world opinion, first of all, I think most Americans share the opinion that the federal government has become a problem. In fact, there's a Gallup poll where Americans say the U.S. government is the biggest problem the American people are facing right now. And so I think people are going to empathize and sympathize with the position of these patriots up there in Oregon. Nobody wants this thing to go violent, and in the court of world opinion, whoever strikes first is going to be the loser. And we've already got the FBI. Whoops. Okay. Tim, sorry, we're going to have to let you go and take a break for our top of the hour news and commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're talking about the race for the White House. We are now finally actually in the election year. And Ben Carson's campaign has hit a major stumbling block just weeks before the first of the primaries and caucuses get underway. His top campaign manager, his communication manager, and 20 other staffers all quit the campaign, citing infighting, his plunging poll numbers, and the negative media coverage. And I'm sure Ben Carson will have some very imaginative explanation, but he really shot himself down with all that nonsense about the pyramids and his documented lies about his glorious history. By the way, a lot of people were commenting on how there was an anti-Trump statement written in the skies over the Rose Parade by a skywriting airplane that's now been identified. That was bought and paid for by a Marco Rubio donor. Illinois is actually considering allowing the possible recall of Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. The Illinois legislature is considering changing the law to allow that to move forward. That's a problem, of course, for Rahm Emanuel, who is still dreaming of running for the White House in 2020, in 4 years' time. Amazing stuff here. Now then, the Obamas are off the island. They're back in Washington, D.C. Traffic's going back to normal here. Total for all of the taxpayer-funded vacations for the Obamas to date, $70 million. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the gun grab. A lot of people are very concerned about what's been going on, the obvious false flags, trying to sell a gun grab agenda. And the GOP candidates are all out there attacking Obama for wanting to curtail guns again. There was that bill that was introduced in the House that just declared all semi-automatic firearms to be assault weapons and just a blanket ban on them all. Now, fortunately, the Senate voted that one down. But GOP candidate Chris Christie said the president is a petulant child. Whenever he doesn't get what he wants, the president acts like a king. George III, to be exact. And therein lies a little bit of a warning. Now, Obama is out there insisting that his new gun control executive orders are well within his legal authority, without saying where that authority derives from, because again, the only legitimate purpose of a presidential executive order is to execute the will of Congress, and executive orders are binding only on the executive branch of the federal government. Obama cannot write new laws from his desk, although he's been doing that and tinkering with it. And his executive orders are not binding on either the legislative or judicial branches. Period. End of discussion. Now, the word coming on out is that Obama wants to deny Second Amendment rights to anybody on a terror watch list. But we know what a joke that list is. The real terrorists aren't on it. The terror watch list is full of people who are there for no other reason than they don't agree with the government. So it isn't really a terror list, it's a you won't do what I tell you to do list. And Obama wants to take guns away from people who do not obey. The same rationale King George III had when he sent troops to seize the colonists' military weapons. That led to the battles of Lexington and Concord and the triggering of the American Revolution. Now, I don't want to see a new American Revolution in this country. But we do seem to have a central federal government that has gone off the constitutional reservation and wants to take away the people's right to say, hey, you have to play by the rules we set down. Now, Obama is up against a very difficult public relations task because his entire argument is that he will protect you, the American people, by taking away your right to protect yourself. That's his entire argument. And he's not finding an audience out there because remember that Gallup poll that showed Americans overwhelmingly viewing the federal government as the biggest threat? Only 2% in that poll thought gun control was a top issue. The audience just isn't there. And to show you how absurd this whole situation has become, President Obama gave military weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, possibly in Iraq, and the Obama administration gave military weapons to Mexican drug criminals through the Fast and Furious program. But despite that generosity, with taxpayer-funded weaponry, wants law-abiding Americans to give up their guns. And if you need to protect your home from a criminal, you call 911. And somewhere between 15 to 22 minutes later, after the call, depending upon where you live, the police may show up. And they may shoot your dog, or your wife, or your kids, or kick down the wrong door. Because right now in the United States, the police are stealing more from law-abiding Americans than the criminals are under the civil forfeiture laws. And police departments trained by Israeli security companies murdered more innocent Americans last year than terrorists and mass shooters combined. That's how absurd this is. Common sense has to tell you. We, the people, have the right to keep and bear arms equal to those in the hands of the criminals in order to protect our homes. We have as much a right to have firearms in our homes as we do fire extinguishers and first aid kits, and for exactly the same reason, to deal with an emergency. Now, Donald Trump is out there already campaigning that if he wins the White House end of the year, one of his first acts to do will be to rescind Obama's executive orders. And I'm opposed to this idea of putting people, of denying Second Amendment rights on the basis of being on some government watch list, because those lists, they're ridiculous. And they're trying to sell it under the idea we're taking guns away from potential terrorists. But terrorist has become a very loosely defined word to the U.S. government. Going through various government publications, we find out that potential terrorists are anybody who talk about individual liberties. Those that advocate for states' rights are considered potential terrorists. Anybody who wants to make the world a better place. Anybody who thinks the colonists who broke free of Great Britain are heroes are potential terrorists. We put together a graphic with all of these 74 different ways that you can be deemed a potential terrorist by the U.S. government, and Obama's executive order is going to say none of you are allowed to have weapons. The list includes anybody who's anti-Catholic, returning veterans, anyone that's anti-nuclear, anybody against illegal immigration, anybody who talks about the New World Order in a derogatory manner. I mean, if you look at this entire list of 74 different conditions under which you can be put on a government watch list, it covers pretty much the entire American population. Running a conspiracy website, guilty. Everybody reading my website, if they can find you, is on a government watch list, and they want to say you can't have guns. We're only going to give guns to people who love the state. Sig Heil, Sig Heil, Sig Heil. That's how absurd the whole thing is. Now, Donald Trump has responded to Hillary Clinton's comment that guns don't keep you safe. And Trump is saying, well, if you actually believe that, then all of your bodyguards ought to be disarmed. Which I'm sure Hillary would do because she's bulletproof. Remember that Bosnia sniper thing, and she's just walking across the tarmac as if she's not being shot at because the bullets just bounce off of her. The U.S. government is afraid of you. The U.S. government understands they've pushed America to the breaking point, and they want to take away your right and your ability to say no more. There is no freedom without the freedom to say no. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, kind of an interesting double standard is on display in the corporate media of this country. When the Black Lives Matter protesters set fire to buildings in Ferguson and Baltimore, the media never referred to them as terrorists. Even when we were being told 2 Muslims murdered office workers out in San Bernardino, the media avoided calling them terrorists and described it as workplace violence. But we have a bunch of armed American citizens up in Oregon demonstrating for constitutional rights, and they have not been violent. There's been no violence, no arson, no vandalism whatsoever, and yet the corporate media is out there saying they're terrorists, that's all they are, they're just terrorists, you should not think of them as patriots, they're just terrorists, they're frothing at the mouth. Meanwhile, the latest word we're getting from Oregon is the Hammonds, the Bundys, Oath Keepers, Siaspoa, Sheriff Mack are all saying stand down. This is the wrong approach at the wrong time. They are absolutely correct. And yes, it is entirely possible that Obama wants something to happen in Oregon in order to sell his executive orders to the American people, and the people in Oregon aren't going to give it to him. But the reality remains that these people are taking a stand because the federal government is not complying with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And as long as the government continues on this policy, there will be a confrontation somewhere down the road. When Gallup is polling that the American people overwhelmingly see the central government as the problem, you know, things are dire indeed. If we're going to keep our Bill of Rights, we have to use it. We have to hold the government to the letter of the law, and not just what some politician or some corrupted judge says the law happens to be. We get a lot of that in the court system now. I'll tell you what the law is. All right. As long as you can back it up. But this do as I do attitude, that's not a republic, that's not democracy, that's absolutism, that's tyranny, and that's dictatorship. Now, you remember not too long ago, Hillary Clinton got in a little bit of hot water by claiming ISIS was using Donald Trump in a terrorist recruiting video. And examination of the video showed a lot of people in there, including Bill Clinton, but no Donald Trump. Well, fortunately for Hillary, ISIS has rushed out a new terror recruitment video featuring Donald Trump. I guess ISIS must really like Hillary Clinton, because they got her off a really big, messy hook with that one here. As 2016 dawns, Europe braces for more waves of migrants. Here in the United States of America, they don't even have any idea how many foreign visitors have overstayed their visas and are here without permission. They don't care. They just want more instant Democratic voters pouring on into the country. They want to blend all the people of Earth together into one massive humanity with no clear idea of who they are, to make them pliant, obedient workers for the New World Order. Angela Merkel in Germany is facing further pressure to impose a cap on the number of migrants entering Germany because of the problems that are being caused over there. The former Czech president is saying Europe is likely to face a real migration tsunami. It has not peaked. It's just beginning. And it's absolutely out of control. And it has already brought the European Union to an end in terms of the borderless interior. All these European countries, they're putting the walls back up, they're putting the doors back in, they're checking IDs. Sweden has launched its own Berlin Wall with Denmark. Travelers have to show ID for the first time in half a century. Copenhagen has closed their borders with Germany. Here in the United States of America, there's been an outbreak of this strange polio-like illness killing American children. Some people thought it was possibly another botch-up with the polio vaccine, and that had happened before. Now, according to this article over an Investment Watch blog, they're blaming this polio-like illness on enterovirus D68. Enterovirus D68 is being flooded into the United States of America inside the illegal immigrants who are coming across the borders without any medical checks whatsoever. And they're bringing in this enterovirus, HIV, H1N1, scabies, a couple of confirmed cases of bubonic plague. Meanwhile, over at the TSA, they have very quietly changed the rules where you may no longer opt out of the naked body scanners. So what if it gives you skin cancer? That's good for the economy. You'll have to go to the cancer treatment place and spend more of the money that you don't actually have. No, Obamacare will take care of you. No, it won't. TSA has announced that they will no longer accept your driver's license from some states. Now, there's no date put in place for that policy, but it's basically another form of pressure to get states to conform with the Real ID Act, which is seen as a national ID, which is a violation of states' rights. The TSA is trying to do that now. And again, we know that real criminals and real terrorists, they can fake these IDs even with the digital content. Or they can steal one, change the picture. I mean, all of these IDs are made to be mass-produced inexpensively to save money for the government, but that makes it very easy for them to be duplicated. Remember 2 weeks ago, it was claimed that ISIS has thousands of U.S. passport blanks and the necessary machine to do the typing, printing, and lamination, including the embedded electronics. I love this story. This is coming out of a YouTube video where cops tasered an 86-year-old bedridden woman hooked up to an oxygen tank. There were 10 police in the room. 86-year-old woman presented such a threat to 10 cops, they tased her. Now, when you're inhaling from an oxygen cannula, the oxygen goes into you. When you're exhaling, it goes out into the room. So the oxygen content of the room is higher than normal, and these guys are firing sparks with a taser. They could have burned everybody in that room to death. 86-year-old woman, they had to taser. That makes a huge amount of sense. And then Obama wonders why we don't want to call the cops to protect our homes when the criminals come on in. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back to the news here, somebody just sent me in the email. John Cleese, who, if you are my age, you remember from Monty Python, and if you're younger than me, from the James Bond movies, tweeted a really good message. I would like 2016 to be the year when people remembered that science is a method of investigation and not a belief system. And we've been talking about how science has become perverted. It's been turned into a religion to get people to believe what the government tells them to believe. GMOs are safe, vaccines are effective, humans are warming the planet, so forth and so on. Getting on back to abuses by the police, apparently an entire police department down in Florida has been sacked for laundering drug money. We talked about that, I think, last Wednesday briefly. Up in Ohio, there was this town, Arlington Heights, that was generating a lot of revenue for speeding tickets, and basically was seen as turning the entire town into one gigantic speed trap to generate revenue. And it blew up in their faces 3 months ago when a state auditor discovered 2 clerks for the town had pilfered $260,000 out of these traffic fines. And the entire police department has now been fired. Now, getting on to the world of computers, and yes, once again, I'm having to fix my wife's machine here. Microsoft has issued a warning that Windows 7 has serious problems. You shouldn't be using Windows 7. Well, because they're not making money on it, for one thing. That's the big problem. Now, I took a Windows 7 laptop, and I gave Windows 10 a fair trial. I allowed it to upgrade. It was a disaster in no uncertain terms. And fortunately, little mentioned feature of the Windows 10 free upgrade is under Control Panel updates, there's an option to roll back. And that actually did work flawlessly, amazingly enough. But at this point, I am turning off all of the automatic updates for Windows 7 on this desktop machine and on the laptop, because Microsoft's next tactic to get you all onto the RMS Windows 10 tick will be to break your existing systems. And if you think I'm being paranoid and extreme, why wouldn't they? Look how hard they're pushing everybody to get on Windows 10 despite all of its well-documented problems. They haven't displayed the best of business ethics recently, and in fact, for pretty much their entire career. Now, Google is having to probe the AVG antivirus Chrome widget. Apparently, 9 million users were exposed by bugs in the system. And AVG's antivirus will stop you from surfing websites hosting malware, but it's also apparently wrecked the online security of 9 million people. Malicious websites could exploit the toolbar's programming blunders to access what other websites a user was logged into. These things are being put out without really being properly tested. The whole attitude of the IT software computer industry is, we're going to sell it to you now, and you, on your own time, will find the problems for us so we don't have to hire people to do it. And, of course, time that is spent patching, fixing, debugging, finding the problems is time that we don't have to actually do something to make money with. So it's a very short-sighted policy. It's making the computer companies richer, and it's a threat to the overall productivity of our nation at a time when we really can't afford that. And, of course, we have a new ransomware out there called Ransom 32. And the NSA can't stop any of these people. Can they? Is the NSA behind all the ransomware and hacking? Scooping up more money for a desperately broke government? Or are they just incompetent? Because the NSA's inability to find the ransomware authors, where even experts in Europe are tracking them down, reminds us once again that the NSA is spying on law-abiding citizens, and they can't find the real criminals and terrorists. And all this brouhaha about encryption is a joke, because real criminals and real terrorists can come up with systems of encryption the NSA can't break. We proved that on our website with our 6 encryption challenges, not one of which was ever solved. And the NSA had a good reason to break those codes, to discourage other people from starting to learn basic cryptography and programming to secure their data against pillage by the government. Google's self-driving car passed a driver's test in Nevada. Unfortunately, has come out the test was rigged. Somebody in the chat room was responding to my comment about John Cleese to remind everybody that January 7th is International Silly Walk Day. I think we mentioned this last week, but we're going to mention it again. The IRS's own identity fraud prevention specialist has been arrested for identity fraud and filing fraudulent tax returns, making a huge amount of money. All right, so let's get on to human-caused global warming. Winter is finally here. El Nino delayed it, but it did not stop it. Record snow in Milwaukee, 11 inches of snow at Green Bay. Storm linked to deaths of 2 men as 9 inches of wintry mix hit area. This is in Milwaukee again. New Mexico works to unbury themselves after the record storm they had last year. Trapped people, suspended newspapers. Now, over in Belgium, their parliament has passed a law that allows euthanasia for children. Now, current Belgian law says that you have to be 18 or over to ask a doctor to help end your life, but they've lowered the age now because they're dealing with a major increase in autism, which they claim is linked to biopesticides, GMOs, and vaccines. And they don't want to take care of all these kids who are damaged by all these modern wonders of pharmaceutical products. So they're just going to start killing them all off. Apparently these kids are so messed up by GMOs and vaccines, even Planned Parenthood can't use them. What a shame here. Now, interesting story out of Natural News, and I'm fully in agreement with this. We've been hearing all these stories about how Chipotle restaurants are being hit with these E. coli contaminations, and the restaurants are having to close and throw out all their food and redo it. And it's happened to restaurant after restaurant after restaurant in this one chain, nowhere else. The CDC has admitted that these E. coli outbreaks involve a rare strain not normally seen in foods, leading to the inevitable conclusion that Chipotle has been targeted for corporate sabotage for taking a stance against GMOs on their menus. Remember how Dr. Oz got castigated for his support for honest GMO labeling? These corporations have no moral compass whatsoever other than, we got to make more money, got to keep the stockholders happy. As long as we're making money, anything we do is okay. Now, there may be some sanity on the horizon because according to a story over in RINF.com, the U.S. government is considering limiting GM corn cultivation because it has given rise to super pests that have evolved to tolerate the insecticides produced by these plants. So maybe finally some sanity. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this, our first show of 2016 here. And we're talking about science and the environment, and there are some environmental problems out there. And the media isn't talking about them. The corporate media is out there talking about, the campaign trail and everything. But over in Missouri, the residents of Bridgetown, near the Westlake and Bridgetown landfills, are getting very, very nervous because that underground smoldering fire continues to get closer and closer to illegally buried nuclear waste left over from the Manhattan Project to build the bomb. And the fire isn't there yet, they think. But with all the heavy rains and flooding they had this last week, some of the runoff going through that part of the landfill is testing as radioactive. And they're now concerned that radioactive contamination from that illegally buried radioactive waste from the Manhattan Project has been leaching into the surrounding populated areas for the last 42 years. And yes, there is a higher than normal incidence of cancers and leukemias in that population. And they've had no idea what's been going on until now. And it is a reminder that the U.S. government has absolutely no concern about the future or the health of civilians when they get into that war mindset. And they leave future generations to deal with all of these problems. Now, out in California, they're dealing with this huge methane leak. Now, the media isn't looking at it because the methane is clear. And looking at the site, you can't really see that anything is going on until a spark sets it off and it starts burning like that out-of-control hole that's over in Asia. But looked at in infrared, it's very obvious this is a huge release of methane. Now, methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. The fact that it shows up as black in infrared tells you it's absorbing infrared radiation and not reflecting it back. Methane depletes oxygen from the air as it decomposes into water vapor and carbon dioxide. 1,500 people have already been evacuated from around this well. And they don't know how they're going to fix it. They're saying it's going to take time, it's going to take time. And meanwhile, this is a bigger hydrocarbon disaster than the Gulf oil disaster. And they're just going to try and pretend it's not an issue. Now, we were talking before about how fluoridating water has no effect on dental cavities. Topically applied fluoride, yes. Drinking it, no. It is a mild tranquilizer. Keeps us all mellow and happy and, not getting angry when the government abuses us. But now there's a new study that has come on out. It's reported over Natural Blaze, saying that after decades of fluoridated drinking water in the U.S., it turns out it's actually harmful. Teeth of the American people in these areas with fluoridated drinking water, which is still quite common in the country. They stopped here in Hawaii back in the 1990s, thankfully. But our teeth are worse than those people in Great Britain. They put this in the water, claiming it was good for our teeth. Actually, they were just trying to get rid of a buildup of this toxic fluoride waste left over from nuclear weapons development. Oh, we'll put it in the water, tell them it's great for their tooth decay, and that'll be the end of it. Now we find out all these years later, it's actually been harming our teeth. It reminds me back in the 1920s when the U.S. government recommended fluoroscopes in shoe stores to make sure our shoes fit properly and allowed workers to stand and work longer and harder. The U.S. Surgeon General even made educational films touting the use of these devices. Then in the 1930s, shoe store employees started dying of cancer, and eventually the machines were banned, although it took until the 1980s to get them all out of the stores. So why would you trust the U.S. government today when it tells you vaccines are safe and effective and necessary, that GMOs are harmless, TSA scanners don't cause skin cancer, and that you humans are warming the earth? Why would you trust them? Our government rules us through lies, fraud, and deception. Keep that in mind. Don't take anything the government says at face value. George Carlin used to say the same thing. His primary rule in life, I don't believe anything the U.S. government says. Because lying to you is how they get what they want. And they don't know any other way to rule because they've been lying for so many generations of the political system. They've forgotten any other way to run a country. Modern politicians would be hopelessly inept in the government created by Thomas Jefferson. They wouldn't know what to do. Story coming out of Natural News, life has been discovered 8,000 feet below the ocean floor in an environment with no oxygen, no light, and almost no nutrients. And it's a reminder that life will find a way wherever it goes. And so I think all of these space programs that want to find life as we are engaging in a biological chauvinism. Because anywhere that you have an energy source and a fluid mixing medium, I think you're going to find life is going to emerge. And it may look nothing like life here on Earth in terms of the biochemistry. There could be life in those methane pools on Titan because you have energy supplied from the sun, from Saturn itself. You have the methane as a liquid mixing medium. All you need is for a single self-replicating molecule to come together, and that starts the process. That starts the process. Little bit of an embarrassment over in Religion Land. Story being reported over in Irish Central. One of their churches over there has a gold-shrouded wooden cross that is claimed to be a piece of the actual cross on which Jesus was crucified. A lot of people were doubting that, so the church said, well, we're going to have it dated. Big mistake. The wood dates to the 11th century. Now then. Let's see. 4 new sexual abuse lawsuits filed against the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And apparently over in Italy, they've arrested a pedophile priest who used Grindr to meet teenage boys. Interesting stuff. I love this story. This came out of RINF.com. Cocaine traces have been found in Britain's most famous churches, including Canterbury and St. Paul's. Getting in the habit, so to speak, here. The Pope Francis has come on out and said atheists who follow their consciences will be welcome in heaven. I would be tremendously relieved if I actually thought there was a heaven, but it was nice of him to say that atheists who follow their conscience are still good people. Because the opinion has tended to be the other way, that if you're an atheist, you must be evil and satanic, and no, we don't believe in that guy either. And finally, interesting little story from Paoli, Indiana. There's a bridge that's been there since 1880. It is clearly labeled maximum load limit 6 tons. And this driver, 23-year-old Mary Lambright, drove her 30-ton truck onto this bridge and collapsed it, because she didn't know how many pounds 6 tons was. Thank you very much, Common Core. That's embarrassing. All righty, we're coming up here on the end of the show, and we're obviously heading into a very interesting year. We're waiting to see what the Asian markets do as they open later in the day. If we're going to see the decline, I am sure that all of these countries are printing up a whole bunch of new money to go to their stock market to try and drive it back up again. But what they're really doing is they're overvaluing the assets and compressing the risk underneath, which means the longer they delay the correction, the worse the devastation will be when it finally breaks loose, as it inevitably must. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and do Jim Goddard's show from Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Start speaking out to people you know who are not on the net and the independent media. They're ready to ask questions. Gallup told us that. Be there with the answers. Aloha, America.